Hello, welcome back. This is going to be part one of history extra classes, and we are going to start with the chapter number three, which has the title as Kinship, Caste, and Class. So, in this chapter, we are going to read about the different problems that were existing in society in terms of discrimination among people, what kind of kinship was being followed, the class problem, the ups and downs, the gap between the rich and the poor. So this is all about the societal problems existing during the time period of 600 BCE to 600 CE. Let's continue. Yes, this is the part one of chapter three, that is kinship, caste, and class. And in the previous chapter, we have talked about various economic and political changes that were going on between the time period of 600 BCE and 600 CE. So we read about the fact that there was extension of agriculture, as I already told you, that there was a need to increase production so that the increasing population could be satisfied, plus trade requirements were very high, and that is why there was an important need of extension of agriculture. We talked about that. Apart from that, we saw that there were various craft specialists, people doing some specialized jobs, and these particular people also turned into a distinct social group. So we read about that. Apart from that, we also saw the increasing gap between the rich and the poor, that is the increasing differences between the various classes that existed in the society. So apart from these, now in this chapter we have to see that there are certain textual traditions, certain texts which tell us about the various norms of social behavior that existed. So first of all, they tell us about the social behavior, and secondly they tell us about and comment on the various social situations that already were being practiced then, what was going on then. So two types of information is provided by these texts. First is about what kind of norms were being followed, and second is the various situations and practices that were already present during that time. So these texts are extremely important in telling us about the various societal categories. Now all these texts have given us information about the various classes, what kind of situations they were going through, what were their economic status in the society. So all these information are provided by these texts. Second important information is the language in which these texts are written. It tells us about which language was considered to be most important, or which language was spoken by majority of the people. Apart from that, it also tells us about the attitudes and practices that were being followed during that time in the society. So one such text which is extremely important is Mahabharat. You must have already heard about it, and obviously during this period of lockdown, Mahabharat, the oldest Mahabharat, is being broadcasted on television. So Mahabharat is an epic. Okay, it is a story which has been written over several years. Now, the entire Mahabharat was never written at one point of time. There were several of the stories of Mahabharat which has been written along a very, very long time period, because it has more than 100,000 verses. Verses means something which explains like a particular lines which explains the situation that exists. So it was written over a very, very long period of time, and it is suggested that maybe it took around 1,000 years to make this text complete. So the central story around Mahabharat is that there were two warring cousins, you know, the two sides, Kauravas and Pandavas, both were fighting for the throne. So this entire story is the gist. But apart from this information that there were two parties which were fighting for the throne, this story in itself has given us so much information about the conditions that were prevailing in the society then. So in this chapter we are going to read about all these major important points. And so the first subtopic is the critical edition of Mahabharat. Now Mahabharat was taken seriously only during the time period of 1919. Obviously it was a spiritual text which was being transferred from succession to succession. So but in 1919 a critical edition was started to be prepared by the historians, and one such Sanskritist historian was V.H. Sustankar, who started making the attempts to make a critical edition. Now, what is the meaning of critical edition is that when you have a certain text, you cannot believe that particular text blindly, because in the previous chapters also we have seen that most of these texts have been exaggeration. The authors of these texts used to write according to their loyalty towards the king, or maybe they wanted something from the king, they want to praise or please the king, and that is why most of these texts have been exaggerated and they cannot be believed on its face value. They have to be critically analyzed. So critical edition means that this historian, he tried to collect all the Sanskrit manuscripts of the text from different parts of the country, whatever different stories were available, and the method of comparing of these texts was he tried to read all these texts at once, and the points which were common in all, जब कोई एक बात सारे टेक्स्ट में दी गई है, इसका मतलब है all these texts are attempting to say that they this particular point is correct, because all the stories or all the texts around the country have explained the same position. So the common points were considered to be true, while the rest points which were varying in different of the texts, they were said to be unbelievable, or they can be said to be not cannot be believed on their face value. So two types of things were recorded in this critical edition of Mahabharata, which was that first there were several common elements in all these Sanskrit versions of the story, which have been found from different parts of India, like from Kashmir, Nepal, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, etc. And the second important point is that there are enormous regional variations in the ways in which the text has been transmitted. Okay, so there were regional variations also that were recorded, and the common elements also that were recorded in the critical edition of this Mahabharata. Now these variations that existed, now I have already told you that there were Sanskritic texts and there were certain other local texts also which were available. So most of the times the stories which have been given in the Sanskritic texts were different from what have been given in the local text. Now these variations suggest that probably there was an ongoing conflict at that time between these dominant Sanskritic traditions and the local ideas. Now the local ideas were a bit different from what the dominant Sanskritic traditions were, and that is why it can be categorized or can be said that probably these dialogues had moments of conflict and as well as consensus. At some times they agreed with each other, and most of the times they did not. So this is the period, or it shows the conflict between the major traditions and the local ideas. Now the next important point is, now all these texts are written in Sanskrit by and for the Brahmins, correct? So they tended to take these texts at face value. Now whosoever used to read these texts, especially the present day historians, they used to believe at the initial level, they used to believe them at the face value, blindly. But when the scholars started studying about other traditions or the other local texts, like in Pali language, Prakrit or Tamil, this indicated that ideas contained in the normative Sanskrit texts were on the whole recognized as authoritative, but at the same time they could be questioned, because most of the time these Sanskrit texts were different, giving different information from what has been given in the local ideas. So most of the times they were questions, and there were some of the times when they were even outrightly rejected, because probably they were not to be believed because of the high exaggerations that were being given in the dominant traditions. Okay, the next important subtopic is the kinship and marriage. So the many rulers and varied practices. So under this, finding out about the families. Now families is thought to be a part of a larger network of people, isn't it? Now our closest family is our parents and our siblings, correct? But our family again is a part of a larger network, like our grandfather, grandparents, etc. So that entire network and family is just a part of that network. So Not all families are identical in the terms that there can be difference in the numbers of members, or the relationship with one another, or what kind of activities were being performed by each family. So all families were different from each other, but at the same time they formed a part of a larger network of people, which can be called as relatives, or relatives can also be called as kinfolk, correct? And familial ties are often regarded as natural based on birth, but they can be defined in different ways. Like, for instance, some societies regard cousins as being relatives, whereas others do not. So families, the definition of family itself varied from culture to culture. Now, in some part of the country, blood relations were considered to be family, while in others they had other definitions of families. Now, historians can retrieve information about the elite families quite easily. We have already studied in the previous chapter, that most of the inscriptions or texts were written about the nobility class, or the wealthy people, or the kings, the families of the kings, correct? And information related to the local or the common masses is comparatively meager. People do not have much incentive to write about the lives of the common masses, because why would somebody just squander away their knowledge into writing stuff in which people were not even interested, that is about the ordinary people? So most of the information that we have is about the elite families, and less of the information or investigation has been done with respect to ordinary people. So historians also investigate and analyze attitudes towards family and kinship. This is important because this helped us uh, find more about the people's thinking of that time. So this is the reason why it was important that we started studying more about the family system that was prevalent at that time, what kind of kinship was being practiced, and this will help us to understand what kind of attitude people used to have at that time, what kind of mental frame they had in society. So this again becomes important. Now, next important subtopic is the idea of patrilineal. Now, patrilineal is a practice where the assets of the father gets transferred to the son, that is the male heir. The female heir is not considered to be the rightful successor of the family. So patrilineal means that the son is the true successor of their father, correct? So at one level, Mahabharata is a story about it. We already know that this is a story about um, two warring sides, where Kauravas and Pandavas belong to the single ruling family, isn't it? Kauravas and Pandavas were the sons of two brothers, and these two cousins, the clan of cousins, were fighting among each other to have control over a particular janpad or land, isn't it? And that janpad is Kurus. So we have in the second chapter read about the Janpad systems. We have read about the Mahajanpad. So Kuru was one such Mahajanpad, and these two cousins, the classes of cousins, were fighting to get control over this land being owned by the Kurus. So ultimately, the conflict ended with Pandavas emerging as victorious, but this started a system of patrilineal. But that doesn't mean that patrilineal was not prevalent before that. Even before Mahabharata, the war of Mahabharata, patrilineal has been a culture in India for a very, very long time. So while patrilineal had existed prior to the composition of the epic, बट महाभारत reinforced this idea, ठीक है? तो ये कल्चर ऑलरेडी प्रैक्टिस हो रहा था, बट महाभारत के वॉर के बाद दिस आइडिया इवन बिकेम मोर पॉपुलर अमंग द पीपल, एंड पैट्रिलिनी वॉज इवन मोर स्ट्रांगली reinforced into the minds of the people. So under patrilineal, what happens is that son could claim the resources of their father. So I have already told you that the male successors are considered to be the true successors. So most ruling dynasties used to follow this practice, but sometimes when there were no sons. Now in this practice also, हर जगह patrilineal follow नहीं होता है. कुछ situations में the situations are different also. When there are no male sons, so in these situations, brothers can succeed one another, or other kinsmen can claim the throne, and there are certain exceptional circumstances when women can also become the successors. Like for example, in the Gupta Empire, Prabhavati Gupt became the successor of his her father, that is Chandragupta. So even women became the successors. So this is what is being told in the chapter, that every idea had various variations in different parts of India. It was being followed differently all over. So we'll start the next part in continuation to this one. Thank you.